out here and I'll show you something interesting. Now over here right next to us, if you'll let me get up through here, I'm gonna come up next to here. These trees over next to us over here, I'm going to kind of sit right here for a second so I won't be in too many people's way. These trees right here are bald cypress trees. We've been seeing these up and down the river up in here. I told you they're related to the redwoods and the sequoias of California. They don't stop growing. But because they grow in water, and again, this water right now is like 1.5 feet lower than normal, but because they grow in water, the roots are constantly submerged. And when they're constantly submerged, the tree shoots up these things sticking up here called knees. Think of those as a snorkel. It enables the root of the tree to get oxygen above the water line. Okay. Now on top of that, because these trees are like redwoods, they're going to continue to get heavier and bigger and bigger. They may have a tendency to become unstable and start to lean. The reason they lean is because this soil out here is extremely porous and it is not really soil. I'm going to show you what it is here. I'm going to take my stick. You guys can stand up over here, or you guys can lay. I'll do the same thing on this side. I'm going to stick this stick down into this mud that you see out here, what looks like mud, and you watch the water around it. Can you see the bubbles coming up as I stick down in here? See the bubbles popping up there? Those bubbles that are popping up, that's gas. And that gas is because this stuff that you see right here, this isn't mud. I'm going to dig underneath it. I'm going to show you. This stuff, look at all the branches and stuff. This stuff is actually layer upon layer of decayed vegetation. Sure. You're talking centuries of growth in here, of plant growth, all the way back to prehistoric times. The plants grow, they die. The next set of plants grow on top of that, layer upon layer of it. So this stuff is extremely porous. If I stick my stick down, unless I hit the root of a tree, this stuff, I'll just keep on going down and down and down. You step into this stuff, you're going to go up to your chest in it. It's very, very porous. These trees are going well over 6 feet down, big trunks, and the roots go well out over 20 feet. Now, as these trees get heavier and heavier, because the soil is so soft, they're not symmetrical, they may start to lean. If they start to lean, the root feels the pressure. Now, look at this tree right here and tell me which way that tree was starting to lean. To the left, and a little bit out that way. You see what I'm saying? If you think of it, instead of being perfectly symmetrical, it started to lean and move out a little bit this way. Now you see these knees here. Those in the front, you can see there's a pocket of knees way out on the other side of it out there. About 10 feet out on the other side of the tree there. That's from this tree. What happened was this tree probably 50, 75 years ago, it might have started to lean because it was soft soil. It was getting heavy. As it started to lean, the root felt the pressure and started shooting up the knees. So the knees serve two purposes. It gets oxygen to the root, and it stabilizes the tree in this soil. Now, if you go into, there's an area we have called City Park in New Orleans. That's got a bunch of bald cypress trees, but all those trees are growing on dry land. And they're growing on dry land, you don't see any knees. The roots will come up above the ground level to get air without having to shoot a knee up. If it's in water, they use those knees to get that oxygen to stabilize the tree. Now, they're called bald cypress trees because unlike other trees that will drop their vegetation a little bit at a time, the bald cypress will hold on to its needles all the way until December. And at the end, somewhere in the mid-December, it will drop those needles in 2 days and go bald. That's what what we got here, bird. Oh yeah, okay. Now, here, this is the yellow-crowned. A yellow-crowned night heron. You see he's got the yellow crown on the top with a little pileated feather that comes off the back of his head. It's a beautiful bird. Yellow-crowned night heron. Now the stuff hanging from the trees, do we know what this is? Moss. Spanish moss, that's right. Now why is it called Spanish moss? Does anybody know this? Let me do something here and see if I can get a, let me find a, this water, actually I can't believe how low this water has come in the last 48 hours. Amazing.
There's some close right here.
I got some right here. You just have to kind of. That's right, and I'll tell you why. That's an interesting. You got it. You got to do is pull off a little piece of this stuff if you can. That's all I need. Now. Gentleman called it Spaniard's beard. It's called Spanish moss, and that is absolutely right. The reason why it was called that The local Indians up here were the Okolapisa Indians. They're part of the Choctaw tribe. I got a friend of mine who's Choctaw I was talking to about 4 days ago. And it's amazing. He only has to shave every other day. He has virtually no body hair. No hair on his arms, no hair on his chest. The local Indians out here, they're just almost like Japanese. No body hair. The first explorers up here were the Spanish conquistadors in the 1580s. They had the helmets and the breastplates, and they had a tradition of wearing long beards. When the Indians saw them, it absolutely terrified them because they saw these white people with these, must look like a spaceman, and they had moss growing right off their face. They had never seen beards before. It was this scraggly, long gray beard, so they called it Spanish moss after the Spanish explorers. Now this plant is what we call an epiphyte. It's a rootless plant. It lives on rainwater and air. No roots to it. Another epiphyte is the pineapple. If you go to a pineapple farm in Hawaii, they plant pineapples in volcanic soil that has no nutritional value whatsoever. The spiny tops collect rainwater and absorb air. That's where it gets its nutrition. This stuff gets its nutrition from the exterior of the plant, this spongy, it looks like it's gray. It's actually a kind of an olive green when it gets wet. It absorbs rain when it rains out here, and it absorbs all the nutrients from the air. Now, it was used as a furniture stuffing ever since they first found it out here for mattresses, chairs, and seats. What was the big invention in America between 1900 and 1920 that had seats? And if you say the toilet, I'm throwing you off the boat. The car, yeah, which car? Ford.
T.
The Model T, yes, the Model T and the Model A. And guess what? The seat factory for the Model T and Model A was in New Orleans, at the bottom of the harbor right next to the Domino Sugar Factory, because Louisiana and Florida were the only two states to commercially harvest Spanish moss. He stuffed all of his seats with Spanish moss. On top of that, when they finished making the seats, they would put them in crates that were made from bald cypress, send them up to Detroit, and they would carefully dismantle the crates and use them for the floorboards for the Model Ts. Now, here's the problem. This stuff is very clean in the trees, but they used to have it collected commercially at these collection points and have like mountains of this stuff, tons of it to use for all this stuff. And sitting there in these mounds, it was very quickly collect bugs. By the time they got him into the Model T seats, everybody about a month later brought their cars back, and they cut the seats open, and they were infested with bugs and mites and ticks and all kinds of stuff. It's like the first auto recall, you know. And what they realized is that they can't use this stuff without processing it first. So what they would do is they would put it in a vinegar solution, and that vinegar solution would kill off the bugs, and it would loosen up this gray, this spongy exterior. And they would feed it into a machine called a moss gin. It was like a cotton gin that would comb away this gray-green exterior. And what's left right down in the middle, can you see that little black hair there? It's a very durable hair, and it will not deteriorate. That little hair is called horsehair. That's what horsehair stuffing is. It's not horsehair, it's processed Spanish moss. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of tons of this stuff used for mattresses, chairs, seats. Every horse in America would be bald if you had horse hair. You have to use Spanish. You can pass it down. They want to take a look at that. Now, on top of that, it was also used in the early settlers when they made their buildings in the French Quarter. The mortar that they would use for the bricks, they would put this stuff and mix it in with the mortar too. It's like rebar and cement. It reinforces the mortar. If you go to some of the original, the really old buildings like on Jackson Square, the Cabildo, there's a lovely museum. Go ask them where the original walls are, and you can look at the mortar between the bricks, and you can see little pieces of moss sticking out of the mortar where they mixed it in with the mortar here. Now, another tree that's really common out here is the Tupelo gum tree, and I want to get you a good example. Look over the end of the boat here, guys. You see this tree over here with the sign on it? Now, that is a Tupelo gum tree. You notice how it flanges out at the bottom to give it stability in the soil. It doesn't have knees, but what it does have, look at that. You see that hole at the bottom of the tree? And there are holes at the top of the tree, and that's a healthy tree. It's got leaves. Those trees have a natural tendency to hollow themselves out, and as we go back down this slough, you'll see all these trees with the hollows in them. Those are gum trees. And those trees are why this area is called Honey Island Swamp. Those trees are a natural nesting spot for honeybees. When the French explorers finally came up here in 1700, they were really excited over all the honeybees that were up here, and they started trading. Is it a hiding? Oh, that. Right here. Oh, yeah. Here's a little. That's the promontory warbler. It's a little swamp canary.
Swamp canary.
swamp canary.
Looking for something.
Beautiful little songbird. He's looking for beetles and stuff up in the moss area. He's looking for little
Almost
beetles. So the French, when they came up here, they were really excited about all the honey that was up here because in 1700 sugar wasn't invented yet, and they started a trading relationship with the Indians over honey. They tried to ship it back to Europe, but it didn't work very well because honey crystallizes. So by the time they got it back to Europe, it was just these kind of hard, sugary clumps. Of course, you can reconstitute it, heat it up, and it melts back again. Now, you know the way honey is made. Bees go out and they collect nectar off the flowers. They bring it back to the honeycomb. They deposit it in the honeycomb, and at that point, it's almost like water. Drone bees in the hive, all they do their whole life is just flap their wings across the honeycomb, and what they're doing is creating a wind current to evaporate the moisture out of the nectar. When that nectar gets down to 2% moisture, it's honey. Now, the two, I know, it's you're suffering, Dave? Okay. I'll be out of here real quick. Now the power surges, baby, power surge. Now that nectar, there's an interesting thing about these kind of honeys that we have. You have, like, for instance, orange blossom honey. If you ever see an orange grove in California, you can see the bee boxes out in the middle of the orchards. The beekeepers rent space in the orchard so that when the bees look for their nectar, they find the blossoms off the orange tree. Clover honey, clover fields, the same thing. The tupelo tree, particularly not this one, but the white tupelo tree, is one of the first blossoming trees in the springtime. And on the Ogeechee River over on the Florida-Georgia border, when just before they blossom, the beekeepers take their bee boxes, put them along the Ogeechee River. The tree blossoms, and that's the first source of nectar for their beehives, their bee boxes. They harvest the nectar off the tupelo tree, and they make tupelo honey. Now, tupelo honey, the interesting thing about it is that normal honey, 2% moisture nectar becomes sugar. With the tupelo nectar, the bees bring the moisture level down to 0.5%. So tupelo honey is twice as sweet as regular honey, and it's so pure, it will not crystallize. So if you want a good, nice honey, twice as sweet as regular honey, you can put it on the shelf, come back 5 years later, it's just as good to get tupelo honey. Go into a high-end grocery store. Does anybody have allergies? Spring allergies at all? Well, if you do, or if you know somebody that does, find an amateur beekeeper that's selling honey within 10 miles of his home or her, whoever, and start eating the local honey, a tablespoon a day, because that honey is coming from the flowers that are making the pollen that give you your allergies. By eating the honey, you're eating the nectar from the flower, and you will build a resistance, and it helps your allergies. I'll send you the bill for that in the morning. Dr. Royan here is going to...
Thank you, medicine man.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, ma'am. Oh, wow, look at that. Let me see. That's probably... Yeah, I see it right there. Let me see what it is here. I really can't tell you exactly what that is. It's not an alligator egg, obviously, but yeah. That was a stupid question. Of course it's an egg. I really don't know what it was, but obviously there's a nest up in there. It could be.
Oh, no, you were fantastic.
You know, that's interesting. It might be one. There's a whole variety of birds out here, particularly cowbirds and things like that. But obviously there's a nest up in there, and it's dropped out of the nest out here. One of the birds that we have out here that's really interesting, it's a very common bird out here, it's called a cowbird. Has anyone heard of the cowbird? It's a parasite. What the cowbird will do is he'll find a nest out here, and she'll leave her egg in the nest of another bird. When her hatchling hatches, it will push all the other babies out. And it will make it will be a parasite and make the mama of those other birds raise it. And they're voracious eaters, and they're constantly demanding food, like a bluebird nest or whatever. Poor bluebird's got to raise the cowbird as its own, doesn't even know it's not his. Yeah.
Oh, that's